right. Well, I brought in some relief for me to answer these mailbag questions because there's a lot of them and it's heavy lifting. So I brought in Sam Fortier to help me out here. Sam, you ready for some Christmas mailbag?
I'm
Okay.
I'm very excited. Let's get it going.
Okay. All right. I feel like Newman and Seinfeld. I don't know. I hope people get that reference. So, all right, let's start with Pedro Smith. And this is a topic that is going to be dominated in the offseason, and it's timely now because of what happened last week. Out of the 4 starting defensive linemen, who is the least likely to get a second contract? And I'll go first. And I wanted to answer this one because a lot of people had questions about Daron Payne, John Allen, what that means, et cetera. And then you saw Daron Payne, somebody said that he scrubbed his Instagram account of washing stuff and his dad was saying stuff. What does that mean? I think to be honest, my take would be if one guy's going to be left out, they've already signed John Allen. We know he's sticking around. Tim Settle's a free agent. I don't know if they'd want to pay him. I think it'd be really, really hard to get rid of one of the defensive ends or not sign them down the road. So I think that would leave Payne as the odd man out if one of them is the odd man out. The other question I would have is if they trade for a quarterback, do they use Payne as to help with that? I think that's another thing you could look at. And I also think it depends a lot on, do you get a veteran quarterback or do you get a rookie quarterback? Because if you're getting a veteran, you're going to have to pay the veteran. And that means you would have a hard time keeping all those guys. They've worked hard to try to put themselves in position to do that. The only way I think you can do that is with a rookie quarterback. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that our thoughts are in line on that issue. But I do think, to me, there is a reality in which they don't end up paying Montez Sweat. Obviously, I think that's unlikely. I think that if you had to pick one of those guys, especially the first guys, it would have to be Daron Payne as who's likely to not get a second contract. But I think a universe exists in which, either they decide that because, premier edge rushers are going to cost you too much.
Yep.
Or, maybe they decide, hey, Chase is the guy we want to build around. And therefore, for our roster to be viable, not just this year, not just next year, but in the future, we can't commit a certain amount of cap to him. And maybe I don't even know if it's about a developmental thing or whatever. But to me, it's just, I think it would be one of those two guys. Obviously, it's not John Allen, as we said.
Right.
Tim Settle, he's only playing, a handful of snaps each game this year. So I doubt that he would be back. And then Chase Young, obviously we're in a world of unknown with him as well, coming back from an ACL injury. But if he comes back and is the same guy, obviously Riveras first draft pick, a guy that is local. He's the sort of guy where it would take a lot, I think, for him to not get a second contract.
Correct. And I think I agree with you on that analysis, even with Montez, that if you're, he would be the other one in that scenario. So, and nothing would shock me with that, because if you're looking at those ends, and I had Joe Corey on, the cap expert, last offseason, and his take was you may have to pay those guys in the $25-30 million range. Can you afford to pay two guys that range? And again, that depends on what you have at quarterback. So yeah, I could see that as well. And again, if you have to trade for a quarterback, there's some enticing trade bait there. Don't know if that would happen, but that's where you've tried to play something out. And if you decided that you can't keep all of them, then you're going to try and maximize their value at some point. So next one is Stammer. It's at Prime Stammer. Is DeShaun Watson to Washington a possibility? And I guess we just talked about Payne being a trade possibility. Let's talk about DeShaun Watson. What do you think?
I think there's a lot that goes into this, but I would have to say that, I feel like the caveat to this situation is barring legal proceedings. We don't know what's going to happen with that. But if his legal issues are cleared up, even though I think he fits the bill of what this team needs in terms of a quarterback in his prime, a quarterback that could come in and immediately elevate this team and have championship aspirations, I am still skeptical because the specific nature of the DeShaun Watson allegations to me feels pretty hard to swallow if your organization is also coming off accusations of sexual harassment, of verbal abuse, of mistreatment of women employees. So to me, DeShaun Watson might fit the bill on the field, but to me it would be certainly a difficult PR situation, to say the least.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to add to that is that he has a no trade clause, and everything I've heard leading up to this point is that he would not waive it to come here. So I think that would shut that down completely. But I think that's a big factor. But what you say from their end, why it would be tough to go get him, yeah. So I don't see that as a possibility. Certainly not right now. But again, something would have to change. For putting aside all the legal crap, which is hard to do because it's a big part of it. But just from his standpoint, I think he'd have to say, that's a place I'd want to go. And that is not the case right now. Ron Riveras Burner. There we go. Are you afraid that no. Are you afraid that rushing the drafting of a quarterback in this upcoming draft class could potentially set this franchise back even more if they don't pan out, as in the D-line end up broken up over that time frame? And I'll start with that. I think what would concern me more is not having a quarterback, because they haven't had one for so long. And if you talk to any football guy, it's like, if you don't have one, you got to keep trying to get one. So now where I would say to that point, if you think a guy is a second or third round talent and you're picking him 10th or 11th, that's a mistake. But if you think the guy is a mid-round first round grade and you're picking mid-first round and you draft him, that's not a mistake. That's picking a guy where he should. Then you have to develop him. And yes, you can set yourself back. It's not, and when people talk about setting themselves back in the day, it set you back even more because the money that was involved for rookie draft picks before there was a cap on the rookie class. It's not the case anymore. So if you draft somebody 15th, it's like Dwayne Haskins, they moved on pretty quickly from him. And it's the inability to find somebody after him, but Haskins himself doesn't set the franchise back years. It's the inability to find somebody after him, but they were able to move on quickly. The money is what would set people back because you're tied into them so much. So, but I think the bigger factor is if you don't have a quarterback, you set yourself back. But I would reiterate, if you draft the guy in the right spot, and there are guys in this draft and there are quarterbacks in this draft that will be overdrafted because the teams are going to talk themselves into loving one. I know people here are already fearful of that, not so much them doing it, but they know that others will do it. Well, you've got to make sure you don't do it either because you need one. I think that's where you get yourself in trouble, and then trying to develop a guy that maybe is not worth developing. What do you say, Sam?
Right. And I think the important discussion to that is the concept of ranges, right? Because when you draft Dwayne Haskins 15, but you had him graded, as a third round pick or whatever, right, that is not in the right range. But
correct.
To the point, to the question of, this is seen as a weak draft class, but I would say if you have a guy who you think could be in the upper first round range, then I think you have to take your shot, because there's going to be there's no perfect situation unless you're Ron Rivera in Carolina in 11 and Cam Newton wins the Heisman and he's obviously your guy. I mean, unless you are in a position to take a Joe Burrow, there will never be a perfect situation to do something. And so I think you have to take that shot if you believe the guy can be the guy. And I would also point out that, the year DeShaun Watson was drafted, that was not seen as a strong quarterback class.
Right.
Scott Turner has pointed this out. And I still think that despite the effort, despite the systems in place to evaluate quarterbacks from before they hit high school to Elite 11 to college games, it's still an imperfect science. And if you think, hey, this guy has a few traits that we can bring in and, we can elevate these traits, or we can game plan around them, he can be our franchise guy. If you believe he has that capability, then I think you have to take that shot, because there's so few layups in terms of quarterback development in this league.
There is. And then it comes down to what do you have around that quarterback to help them succeed? I mean, you look at Mac Jones. I think if Mac Jones goes to Chicago, he's not, he's not what people think he is right now. And you look at Patrick Mahomes, he was not a top pick, and he went to a place that was perfect for him, and DeShaun Watson went to a place that worked out well for him. So you're right. I mean, I think that's another factor here, but I agree. Like if you like the guy and you think he's a first round quarterback, and you're picking there in the middle first round, it's like 10 slots higher. Well, that's okay, because you need the quarterback, and that's the round where you want to get him. Yeah, because with Haskins, he was rated as a third round grade by their scouts. And the only reason why I say he didn't set him back years is because, again, they were able to move on from him. They could have moved on from him the next year. If they hadn't, if they, I mean, that goes, if they wanted to, they could have taken Justin Herbert. Now that's where you set yourself back with that decision. And I understand it. And I think that's where maybe I should amend what I say, because I think if it had been a year later, if Haskins had been here 2 years and it had that second year like you did here, well, they absolutely would have taken Justin Herbert number 2. But because it was a second year and because you wanted to see, well, maybe you could get something out, maybe you could make it work with him, and the guy you really liked was Joe Burrow, then maybe you were willing to go a different direction and go with Chase Young. So in that regard, it did not help. So anyways, yeah, they need a quarterback.
Sorry. And to that point, I mean, I remember, like, I wrote a story about Patrick Mahomes when he was a junior at Texas Tech, and at the time he was just seen as the latest shiny stat sheet off that air raid systems development, right? And I used to cover the Chargers before I covered this team, and I was at Patrick Mahomes' first start, and when he cooked the Chargers, obviously that's become sort of a commonplace thing, but we were really surprised because you didn't know what he could do, and I know that with Justin Fields, with Mac Jones, a lot of these rookie quarterbacks start right away. But Patrick Mahomes was an example of, hey, we think this guy, he can throw it 80 yards from his knees. Let's bring him in. Let's develop him along for a year and then put him out there. So I think really what this shows you is that there are multiple different ways to attack developing and finding your franchise guy, but you have to be on a cohesive, clear plan where everyone is pulling in one direction, as we've not seen be the case here before. Right.
And that's a big key. And it starts with the front office and the coaching staff being on the same page with it. And then the plan to develop them. And, we saw that with Haskins, they were not on the same page. And while the organization said, hey, we don't want to play him this year, they ended up having no choice because the way the season unfolded, but the desire was that was where they were on the same page, but they were not on the same page as far as talent level, should they draft him in the first round or not. And it does matter. And I think that's why Mahomes went to the perfect place for him. I think, listen, Aaron Rodgers went to the perfect place for him years ago because, it's funny because Washington could have drafted him 9th overall in that draft if they really liked him. But would he have been Aaron Rodgers here? Because he goes to Green Bay, they revamp his throwing mechanics, they revamp a lot of his game. He sits behind Favre. And then when he's done working on all the changes and all that, he gets a chance to play and he becomes what he is. If he had come here, do they change all his mechanics? He probably has to play right away. So is he a different quarterback because he hasn't gone through those mechanical changes? And so everything depends on where you get drafted and what you're able to do with him once you get there. So Green Bay had a plan for him, and I think it's kind of worked out. So let's go to the next one. Skins Universe 8. If you had to bet right now, more quarterback. Do you think they prefer to acquire a veteran quarterback on the trade market or a favor of drafting a quarterback? Well, just my thing real quick on this would be, I think they always would favor a rookie quarterback, in part because then they can afford, you always want the rookie quarterback on the rookie contract because then you can continue to build around them. If you have to go out and trade for a quarterback, a Derek Carr, you're going to have to pay Derek Carr. So that goes back to the first answer we had about the D lineman and having to, then who's going to be the odd guys out. So my sense would be favor drafting a quarterback, but I don't know that that's going to be the ultimate solution because I think when you look at the quarterback classes, there aren't a lot of guys that the depth isn't there. So if you're not sure you're going to get one of those guys, then you're going to have to explore the other. But I think the preference would be build around, draft a guy, and then go. But what do you think?
I think they would have no preference in terms of they just want one, finally. But if they had to, I mean, I would argue, like you said, for roster building, it's much more effective to have a rookie. And obviously, there are, I think, even habits or ways that you can mold him to fit, how you see your talent most complementing him. But I do think, just to kind of give another perspective here, I do think a veteran could be an attractive option just because you seem to have the line in place. Your skill players are coming along. And if you could go get a guy, a Derek Carr, a Russell Wilson, I'm not saying those are candidates. I'm just saying that those are guys who are potentially on the move this offseason. If you were able to get one of those guys, it's sort of a plug and play. You you do sacrifice financial flexibility, you sacrifice ability to grow, down the road. But I think that you're willing to take those risks, especially if you're Ron Rivera headed into year 3 and you really need to show
Right.
some growth. And so I think that they don't. I think that no matter which one they end up pursuing, you can kind of market it a different way. If you get a rookie, hey, this year might not be the best, but hey, we're growing towards something. If you get a veteran, hey, we can go out and do what we want to do right now. But I think there's multiple ways to cut it. But if you had to pick one, I think you'd obviously prefer to hit in the draft.
Right. You want, and I think then again, it's always, what is the cost? So if you want to go out and get a Derek Carr and you're going to give up a couple picks, I'm not giving up 2 first-round picks, but you give up a first and something else, then you have to pay them. So now you're going to lose some players possibly because you're going to have to pay them. And so like, what is the, who are you going to have to lose? Are you still able to build around that quarterback? But do you have to build as much around Derek Carr as you would around one of these guys in the draft? So I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. But your first point was the best one. Their preference is to find a quarterback. And they did offer a first and a third for Matthew Stafford last year. And what I'd always heard is when they feel like the roster's at a certain point, they could be more aggressive pursuing a quarterback. Is the roster at that point now after this year? It's probably debatable to say that. But I think, I think they'll be very aggressive, though, looking for a quarterback one way or another. So, all right. Go ahead.
Sorry. I think that, like, one more to your point, their cost to everything. Yes, if you get a veteran, you have to pay him and then you have to structure the team around him. But I think the cost of drafting a rookie is the uncertainty that comes along with it.
That's a fair point.
What if he, if he tops out as an Andy Dalton, I guess, are you okay with that? Is that good enough? What is the threshold of what he needs to hit as a development to then make the financial flexibility worth it? Because,
and that's good.
Justin Herbert obviously is great, but if he maxes out as Tua, and can that guy, obviously the Dolphins right now are making a push, but can he get you to the playoffs? Can he win you a Super Bowl? I mean, the cost is uncertainty.
That's a great point. And I'm glad you made that because, and I'm looking at roster building, but you're right. If you want to, Derek Carr, exactly what you'd have in him if that's the guy you went after. And I bring him up all the time. I bring him up more because I think that's probably a more realistic option because guys like Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, if there's a no trade clause or a preference, I don't know that it would be here. And I don't think those teams would want to trade in the NFC either. So that's why, that's why I always go back to Carr, and you do know what you have in him. And he's definitely an upgrade here. And then it's what's the cost? But to your point, the cost, and this to an earlier point about setting something back, if you spend 3 or 4 years trying to develop, whoever it is, whether it's Malik Willis or Coral or whomever, and you get to 3 or 4 years and you realize it's just not going anywhere. Well, then what? Where have you gotten? So, there's a risk to all of it. I mean, that's why they get a lot of money to make these decisions. And it's why we don't get paid quite as much to second guess them. So, all right, let's go on. The next one is a process. Do you view Jamin Davis ultimately growing into the role of the second linebacker with Holcomb when he playing nickel? Great if you were also Mike, but not critical. Looks to me to be thinking, not reacting. If you can't be trusted nickel, looks like a blown pick. Well, my quick take on Davis is one, ultimately they see him as an outside linebacker. They know they need to get a middle linebacker for next year and put Cole, Holcomb, and then Davis on the outside where I think they're much more suited. So I do think that Davis is a good cover linebacker. I think he will grow there. I agree that sometimes the thinking and not reacting, especially against the run, that's where I think he probably thinks a little bit more. I think it's too early to call him a blown pick. And I say this as somebody who, when in our pre-draft stuff, I had them taking Owusu Koromoa from Notre Dame to play outside linebacker because that's a guy that I really liked. So I'm not going to write off Davis after 1 year because there are games where you see the coverage is there. So let's see how he develops, but I don't write guys off after 1 year like that. But anyways, what do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I think that he could still grow into that outside linebacker, like you said. I think the coverage, you can see it sometimes, the athleticism, even, against the run, sometimes when he does read and react, you
Correct.
see what
see
they
it.
were looking for. But I do think them even saying, or their sense that he probably is best suited as an outside linebacker is a little bit of a tacit acknowledgement that maybe, the pre-draft evaluation might have been a little off, because,
Correct.
when we talked to Ron at the Joe Gibbs event over the summer, the thing that he pointed out, someone asked about, could Cole Holcomb be, an every down linebacker? What could he grow into? And Ron went out of his way to say that he thought that Jamin Davis could be the Luke Kuechly type, because,
Right.
not necessarily saying he could be Luke Kuechly, but we were talking about position flexibility before the draft, especially with the Wusu Koromora playing strong or nickel or linebacker. And he made the point that the thing they liked about Jamin Davis was his positional flexibility in linebacker, being able to play both outside positions or, being able to play middle. And I think that we've seen this year him maybe not progress as much as that Mike linebacker, as we saw, even in off-season workouts when he was getting some time at those positions. So I agree. It's too early to call it a blown pick, but I do think the ceiling might be a little lower than they anticipated.
And I think, and you're right. And I think, it's funny because before the draft, I had talked to some people who I really trust, and they did not think that he was an inside linebacker in the NFL. They thought he was an outside linebacker. A few teams did. A few people I really trust did view him that way. But I think they've come to the realization that they needed a middle linebacker. And so I think that goes to your point. And he was not what they were hoping necessarily as far as the position flexibility, but I still think he has value for them. And down the road, I think he could develop into something outside, but he's got to do it. And again, I'm not trying to, defend their pick, because I felt like they should take Koromora but anyway, so moving on. Spider Strick wants to know, I understand this year's free agent class has underperformed and the draft class appears to be coming along slowly. Don't you think people are panicking over the front office way too early? I mean, they've only overseen one off season. What do you think?
Well, I mean, yes, I think that the sample size is certainly small. You want to see, maybe one or two more at least before you say, hey, this front office has had this certain trends. And I'm always wary of hammering guys for misses because I think every front office misses, and it's all about overcoming those misses. But I do think the concern for me is if you're going to go out and get a number one corner in William Jackson, and then either he is unable to transition or it takes a long time to transition into your scheme, or the coaching staff can't figure out the way to maximize him. If everyone is not on the same page, that to me is more concerning than the development or the performance of one certain player or pick. And obviously, if Jamin Davis, if that was the case where, someone saw him one way, another person saw him another way, but ultimately the evaluation didn't match what he was able to do on the field, it's not a bust, but certainly it's concerning. What was the process to get to that pick? I think they have hit on Sam Cosmi, even though he's had some injury concerns, and John Bates has been a nice surprise. Diami has been, I think, a disappointment so far, but he has shown the capability of making that play last weekend. So I think it's too early, but I do think there are some worrying signs of, hey, how did we arrive at this decision?
Right. Well, and I think that's what you have to do with this offseason, and when they look back on the season, be honest with yourselves about how you got, why certain things happened. With William Jackson, I'll be honest, people I know who know him well, like he's a man corner. He's not his zone corner. And they played a lot more zone here, especially in the second half of the year. And you still see him adjusting to some of that. And I think he's been fine, but is he worth what you're paying him? I think that's certainly questionable. Curtis Samuel, the hard part with that one is, first of all, I mean, he was productive in Carolina. I don't think he's a game changer, but I think he's a productive player, but he got hurt. So how do you look at that one? Well, he got hurt. And so is that a fault in the evaluation or the signing? They knew him very well. And I know some people felt like they overpaid him, but free agency, taking the money away, he's a guy who can play in this league, and I think he could have helped them. So I think with him, I would say the jury's out, but like everybody else, you need to see it. But I agree with you. I think you have to decide, well, you have to go back and evaluate, and again, be honest about the evaluation and say, why, if you're the team, you say, why did we not get more production from our high-end acquisitions? And I would include Davis in that, Samuel, again, injuries, but was there more to it? Then with, Diami, I'd put him in there, and then William Jackson and Ryan Fitzpatrick, obviously an injury, injury situation, but they did hit on other guys. DeAndre Carter, Charles Leno was a good signing. Derek Flowers trade was a helpful one, but they're missing the impact of those high-end guys. And that's where and listen, if you're a fan, you want to have confidence that when they go to make those picks this year, that, okay, well, you can trust what they're doing and that they're going to get it right because there's a track record. And the last year, it did not pan out for them. So, all right, let's see. We'll make this the last one here. Justin Thrush. Outside of quarterback, I feel the biggest area of need / talent influx is at linebacker. Even with Davis, they were paper thin in depth, and it's showing late in the season. Do you agree? I think, anyway, let's go there. Do you agree with that?
I think the linebacker is a big area of concern. I think they've built up the offensive line, the defensive line, which I think is a separate discussion about, the talent they have.
Right.
Are they maximizing it? I don't think we've seen them really play up to their capability, except in that stretch run in 2020. So maximizing the talent you do have, I think, is a separate conversation. But I think that, Bobby McCain has been a helpful signing once they figured out that rotation back there. So I think your secondary, other than the underperformance of William Jackson we've talked about, I think that linebacker is a big thing. And obviously they've been hurt over the middle quite often this year. Jamin Davis, even though he's shown strides in coverage, hasn't always been super consistent. And I think Cole Holcomb would tell you that even though he's grown a little bit, the consistency hasn't been there. And I think that linebackers coach Steve Russ has talked about that as well. So to me, I also might say running back, because I think that Antonio Gibson still has a little bit of ways to go. And I think that position group, especially without J.D. McKissick, and he's going to be a free agent this year, you might need to really address that. But obviously, the running back position is shown to be more replaceable over the last decade or so. So linebacker to me is probably the one, especially inside linebacker, is I think the one that you really have to attack going forward.
I agree, and I think they do. I think they would as well, because defensively, that's the missing piece, is the inside linebacker. And I think Cole Holcomb has grown there, but I still think outside is where they feel he's most comfortable, and I would agree with that. And I think what you see sometimes is the hesitation still. Some games you do not. I think there were times as the year went on where you started to see, okay, there's a see it, go get it. But I think they need that consistently, because when that doesn't happen, it leads to big plays. Or sometimes, Sam, sometimes it's just like you might hesitate and it might lead only to a 5-yard gain, but now it's 2nd and 5 versus it should have been 2nd and 7 or 8. And those little plays add up. And I think that's what they'd like to get to. And they playing behind that front, you need a guy that can play off those double teams, because there are a lot of times this year, too many times. And I started to see it better during that 4-game win streak. It was better, but too often behind those double teams, you're not seeing the linebackers take advantage of those and getting into the hole quickly to either get the double teams off the lineman quicker, or to be able to attack the gap and meet the back in the hole rather than 3 yards downfield, or to getting yourself taken out of a play. So I think that's a big missing piece for this defense. And I think they'll be aggressive looking for a guy there. And I agree with you on the running back. I think the depth has been an issue. And, when they cut Peyton Barber, and I tweeted something about this, and it's like, it's not so much I think Peyton Barber is a great guy, but they needed a guy like him, and if you're going to keep a Jarrett Patterson, great story, to see what he can do in the future, but it seemed like they were reluctant to use him at times. If that's the case, you needed to keep another veteran, or find a veteran of more depth there to somebody who can come in and for a McKissick or Gibson, because we don't know yet if Gibson can handle what kind of load he can help for a full year, because he's been hurt. He's had a lot of injury issues this year. It would have been nice to have some more veteran depth or just depth, more stronger depth to help him out. And I think they may need that depth over the next 2 weeks because I don't, who knows if he's even going to play. So I think I would agree with you there. I think the last one, I would say receiver, they have addressed that, but what they need there is for guys to develop. You need De'Ami Brown and Antonio Gandy-Golden to develop, and Gandy-Golden has not. And De'Ami Brown, outside of the one catch, hasn't shown anything. And so they need those guys to develop. And then you need Curtis Samuel to be a contributor. But I would say I'm not going to sit there and count on that. If I can go get another guy, I'm going to get him because you need another guy. You can't have another year where midway through the year, we're wondering, hey, how does Terry McLaurin do this with no help? I mean, I'm not going to sit there. Are you confident that De'Ami Brown and Curtis Samuel will be what they need next year, Sam?
No, I don't think you can be. There's no evidence to suggest that one of those guys is going to be able to step in and really take the focus away. And I know that Logan Thomas being out hurts as well. And there are so many, caveats or explanations for this. But when you think about who are the pillars of this offense, starting with quarterback, obviously, but you really don't have a good sense of, I think, at least at the skill positions, who is going to take away, the attention from Terry McLaurin that we've heard about at the end of the last 2 years. And right. I think going back to your point about linebackers and leaky yards, allowing, a 2-yard run to be a 5-yard run, that to me, I think is the question of Antonio Gibson, because while he has shown a tremendous ability to get those tough yards, especially in that Tampa Bay game, during that 4-game win streak, he really handled a more touches on average than his previous career high. But due to his durability, or other factors, whether it was the shin earlier this year or the toe now, I don't think has shown a consistent ability to turn what has blocked to be a 5-yard run into a 7 or an 8-yard run. And while, development at running back and knowing which holes to press and knowing when to cut it outside, those things are good. But can you then translate that into the 1 or 2 or 3 extra yards that puts you in 3rd and manageable instead of 3rd and 5 or 3rd and 6. I think those are really important things that we don't know yet.
And I think, because those hidden yards add up quite a bit. And, and I think you're right. I think that's a good point. And that's why, like I said, I would put running back on that list. And line, I'd always put offensive line on there. Plus you figure you're going to probably lose Brandon Sheriff. So you have to put, either more depth, unless you think Sadiq Charles can be the guy at that spot, or Wes Schweitzer. So you do have some depth there, but I'm going to look for more after this year, because I think even at center, I'm going to want another guy behind Chase Rouillet who can give me some consistent play in there. And this year is unusual with all the injuries, but I still want somebody in there and I like Keith Ishmael has some skills, but he's not a strong guy. And I think if you want to run a power game, you're going to need to have that guy in there. So, but anyway, I think those other ones are the ones, linebacker, running back, I would put up there higher. So Sam, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot for delivering the mail. And, I appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. I actually have a quick mailbag as well. I found a question. The question comes from Pete Haley, NBCS. It is, who is John Keim's favorite Washington football team beat writer? He can't say himself.
Well, then I don't have one.
Good answer. Well done.
All right. Thank you, Sam.
As always, Keim.